Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Two Existential Dudes podcast. This episode will begin, I guess, season 2 of since we kind of had a big finale there with.
It was a big fun. We didn't have a great cliffhanger though, so we gotta work on that.
Kozar episode. Well, we didn't have a cliffhanger. We also didn't have like the last 10 minutes of
That's true.
We think that this episode, I've changed some settings around, so I think this should solve the problem of
the first of a new era, an era in which we know what we're actually doing this time.
Yeah, hopefully. I think.
Hopefully.
It looks like it's good, I think.
Maybe.
I hope.
If it's not, well, we'll figure that out later. But thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about a very fun topic that Luke sent me a video to quite abruptly with a single proposition and absolutely no introduction, which was very great.
Yeah, just some backstory. That's usually how most of these topics come to fruition, is we just get talking, and then there's normally like, I won't use the metaphor I used with you.
No, let's not do that one. That one's a little private. But yeah, effectively there's a bit of a lead in, but
and then we get into like down the road we get into like these insanely complex topics and stuff like
compared
that.
to our other episodes where they would start a little more fluid and then get solid as we went.
Yeah.
Luke quite literally sent, watch the following video and read my quote theory.
I deliberately put theory in quotes because like theory, it's basically just a summary, an elaboration of the video.
Yeah, you sent me a really great theory, quote unquote, and then I proceeded to send you a longer piece of
lots of words
discussion, lots of words, from vying to everything is entertainment to coercion, among other things. So, without hesitation, why don't we get into this?
Should we start by summarizing the video?
Yeah, I believe so.
So, sorry, can I see
what
I wrote?
You want your thing
originally?
You can't remember exactly what you wrote from 3 days ago?
No, and this was like
word for word.
Also, I love your picture, your profile
image
for me.
Santa hat and small clarinet.
So the video in question is an excerpt from one of acclaimed clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson. You may have heard of him. He kind of has been, in the past few years, dragged kicking and screaming into the political realm because everything is political these days.
Of course.
That can be an episode someday.
Write that down.
Write that down.
Write that down.
But it essentially touched on the topic of mental illness and how today it's often misunderstood. And
so what I took from it is that the cause of mental illness is often drawn not from what really is causing it, and thus the mental illnesses that we associate with those causes are not genuine mental illnesses, and rather crises in the face of increasing complexity within one's own life.
That's where
we'll go.
Where I was going with
this. We're getting there.
So, mental illness is often the resulting misunderstanding of an overload of complexity in one's life. I think that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah, so I went through, and to start my notes, I conveniently defined each one of the terms in our title. So, complexity is the increasing details in our own lives. For example, more projects, jobs, issues, things to remember, a loved one passing away, a new cat, a move, just things getting more complicated and much more difficult for simple human brains to understand and comprehend and effectively address. So in that situation, when we're feeling overwhelmed and overexerted, we result in crises, which in this context are is just simply a panic that results from that. So, for example, one of the examples he used in the video was you lose your job, a family member dies, and you just moved out of town. All happens within like the same week. And he used this to say like this is a high complexity right at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's also high emotional strain. And a crisis that could result from that would be something like shutting yourself in, absolutely panicking, perhaps even taking self-harm in such a situation, and just what's the word? Loathsome in general?
Yeah.
Just being loathsome. And then the final piece of our title is mental illness. And we have episode 9, is it?
Yeah, episode 9.
We talk a lot about how we want to define mental illnesses. Please watch that for our full discussion. But for today's episode, unless redefined, the context of this episode is that mental illness is the colloquial definition, meaning a non-prescribed, largely emotional situation of self-doubt. As opposed to how we try to define it in our previous episode as a strict medical issue and a chemical imbalance. And you'll see as we go through this how these definitions intertwine and are confused more often than not. But that's where we're going to start with this, just so this makes more sense.
All right. That's interesting because I kind of was thinking of mental illness as, in this case, a collection of symptoms, which I'll get in. I have another source that kind of frames it in that way that I'll get to later. So essentially, the issue of complexity happens when an individual becomes unable to cope and begins displaying symptoms of what we would typically think of as that, I guess, colloquial definition of mental illness. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a number of reasons for this. Like, our world has gotten a fair bit more complex.
You can turn the television on and have countless things going on. Mm-hmm. The Middle East, the trade war, Europe, just constant things going on. And we'll talk about this. This is something I really want to get into, but particularly when these issues are global and things that we can't directly affect, they have a strong adverse effect on our ability to manage that complexity.
Yeah. Throwback to the media episode 5, there's so much information that's not really relevant to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it would be much more advantageous of us to focus on things we can control.
Mm-hmm. In my literally my opening statement to your initial quote theory was, in our contemporary society, everything is vying for our attention, which is just part of the greater everything is entertainment discussion. Meaning it is incredibly difficult for an individual to focus on one thing in a concentrated collection of things. And it's just, with so much going on and everything grasping your attention, how are you meant to focus, honestly?
Mm-hmm. And you could make the argument one way or the other that we have gotten better at handling complexity or worse at handling complexity. But the bottom line is our ability to handle these things has not increased at the same rate as the complexity of the world. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would probably argue that we've gotten better at complexity. I'm sure while the gentlemen of the Enlightenment were very good at handling a lot of things going on, even their biggest issues, the political climate of the so-called balance of power and those early wars prior to the First World War, even those events were drawn out and, for the most part, quite traditional, and significantly less potent than what they are today. If you were living at that time, you would have heard about the wars going on, heard about this quote balance of power, the Conference of Vienna, where they talked about all the borders and all that stuff. But that stuff, though they were events, and unless you were actually present at them, they weren't particularly effective to most people. And even those things took place over weeks.
Yeah.
Where the modern was G7 summit or G27 summit, whichever one it's on, I don't know. Those happen over like less than a week and concern the entire economy of the world. So I would certainly say the complexity has increased, and we've certainly gotten better at it because a man of the Enlightenment would not be able to handle that initially, but we're still lagging behind how quickly it's increased.
All right. But maybe a better way of putting it is we're better at handling complexity, but we're worse at knowing what in our lives to deal with. So our efforts are misplaced, I guess would be a good way of saying it.
Yeah, it feels more often than not that everyone seems to be a jack of all trades. And not necessarily in regards to like a profession, as once you have a profession and a job.
But in knowledge about...
Yeah, once you have a job, you clearly have a focused thing that you're doing. But in what you want to study privately, what relationships you wish to pursue, how you want to raise your family, that stuff, in addition to being less concrete in their ideas, our focus is spread so thin across them, it's very difficult to focus on one in particular.
That's interesting, because it seems like everyone nowadays is an expert on the economy or on any political issue, on law, things like that.
Right. And there is something to be said about having excellent deduction and induction and being able to come up with issues for a lot of things, but more often than not, the people who are Facebook economicists or Facebook politicians cannot officially carry that weight in a book. Dang it. I knew you'd get it. I can't get 3 words without you catching my mistakes.
Moving on.
Great segue.
So, in addition to the complexity, we humans have a certain proclivity to formulate overly simplistic solutions and diagnoses of things. Throwback to last episode.
Yes.
So as a result, we perceive this inability to cope with complexity as a mental illness.
Yeah. It's funny how I was wanting to go to this section of the discussion too, and you went right there for me. Thank you. But
we're on the same...
We are absolutely on the same wavelength at the moment. But this ties into that increasing complexity in the world, not only in things vying for your attention, but the fact that so many things require such a vast comprehension to understand them. The example I used when earlier discussing it with you was the politics of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yes, the people prior to us should have had a better understanding of those things, particularly the famous Sykes-Picot agreement, which is a mess, to say the least. But for any politician to try and address that region today, they should have a vast understanding of the history, the culture, the way things work in that society, and just what things will work to help solve those issues that are occurring there, and what things will obviously not work, and in some cases come across as borderline offensive. And I use this example to say that even if the president is focusing all of their efforts on solving the Middle East crisis, it is such a high bar of education that I feel that few individuals, if any, could really address it fully. And more often than not, that's why we get these simplistic, short-sighted, overarching ideas that try to solve everything, and usually they fail.
Yeah.
Because they're so oversighted and often not backed in that greater comprehension.
So that's interesting. You're taking this more as you're sort of outlining how this applies to things more generally, like global politics and such.
Oh, we'll get to the local level.
Oh, okay.
That's my next part, yeah.
Because that's mostly what I have.
Yeah, that's where... Are you ready to go into that?
Yes.
So, the reason I start with that global level is to draw the comparison then to the local level. And the example I used for that with you earlier was that more often than not, we don't know how to address our local issues because we're so focused on these great global issues. We just we don't know how to address our own selves, and these great issues are so complex we're not used to understanding them within ourselves. And the example I use for this is the famous democratic socialism movements and anti-Vietnam intervention movements that were so common amongst college students in the 70s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
And I won't address the value of these movements to avoid controversy, but I would argue that, harking all the way back to episode 1, it's much more important to address one's self before trying to attack those higher goals, because you really can't fulfill any issue and solve it unless you know how to solve one inside yourself. Mm-hmm. And because they're trying so desperately to solve these issues they can't solve, they assume they can't solve them within themselves.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly what I was looking
the
for.
The same wavelength. It's like we only have one brain.
That wouldn't be good. 2 brains are better than 1.
That's the pun.
And I don't know.
I was funny, man. Come on. I'm funny. Tell me I'm funny.
You're hilarious.
Thank you. Anyways.
So, getting back to the original point and the video that this topic originally took inspiration from, regardless of the presence of what we define as mental illness, I mean, you can debate all day, and we'll get into that. We'll get into more of it.
We have debated
but the best means of overcoming this is through introspection.
Absolutely.
Just to tie it back around to everything.
Folks, if you haven't listened to episode 1, do it.
For now, just a quick... I've sort of come up with a few categories of introspection that we will definitely do a follow-up episode to episode 1, but just for now, this is what I roughly came up with for today. Introspection is the critical examination of oneself morally, spiritually, intellectually, behaviorally, and psychologically. He's thinking.
So, the way we use it, yes. From a strictly psychology standpoint, it would only include behaviorists, like the way you behave and the way you think, particularly the way you think. But the way we're using it, yes, all of those do apply and should apply. Introspection is a specific technique that was used by certain social psychologists throughout, I want to say, the 1800s. But today it has taken a greater meaning to mean all that. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
That's fair.
But you are on the right track.
And sort of my next thing I wanted to say, making another connection, I wanted to compare these mental illnesses to your definition of fear, meaning that the only way to overcome them is a carefully formulated plan.
Oh, look at you.
As you said in episode 8, which may or may not have been cut off.
I hope not. That was a good section of it.
Yeah. Go.
So you're saying that the flaws that we identify and the issues within ourselves also must be attacked by a carefully considered plan?
Well, not necessarily the flaws, but these perceptions that people have of being psychologically psychologically damaged, I guess you could say,
That'll work.
incapable of just getting over it, they take a plan, and the alternative to something like that would be antidepressants, which I've got a plethora of stuff.
We have a whole episode on that stuff. Have some soma. Yeah, that's insightful. As more often than not, to get a little ahead of ourselves here, when people have these crises from increasing complexity, their immediate solution is to speak to a psychologist, particularly a therapist, to try and, to put it bluntly, make sense of their lives, because they can't figure it out themselves, which I would argue is a proper use of a psychologist, or a friend, because if you can't work something out within your own mind, you definitely should find someone's help. In much the same way that you and I seek each other when we're struggling with something.
Certainly.
Which has happened on many occasions. However, I will say that the level of struggle and failing comprehension of a topic that you and I would usually meet before wanting to speak to each other is not met by the majority of people. And that doesn't mean to say like, well, we're great, these enlightened individuals, but it's rather to say that people feel, to put it shortly, they don't want to figure it out themselves. They want to be told how to figure it out.
Yes. You really are just following my notes perfectly.
Same wavelength.
Despite not seeing them at all.
Oh, this is a good one.
So just to address that really quick, yes, people certainly do. Like, I do all sorts of like assessing before I would come to you with something.
Yeah.
And then let's say one of us had an issue that we just couldn't figure out.
That's why we brought Mr. Kozar in. Because we didn't think we could figure that out ourselves.
There would be at least one or two layers more before I would go to a professional.
Yeah, the best example I'll use here, you've told me a couple times prior that in situations where and stop me if you don't want me to share, but in situations in which you have felt very overwhelmed, you've told me many times before that you intentionally, rather than calling me, send me a structured message.
Yes.
Effectively, and the way you put it was filtering out the emotion.
Yes.
So it's really interesting to read these incredibly emotionally charged messages that lack emotion.
Yes.
It's fascinating, and I will not disenfranchise you at all. They are phenomenal to read. Every time I get one, it's like I feel horrible for you, but I feel great reading them because they're just
Well, and
but the reason I use that example is to demonstrate how you use each of those levels to filter out what you can and understand it yourself. And I would guess there have been cases where you've prepared those things and not sent them because you figured it out.
Yes.
Yeah?
A lot of time, yeah, because a lot of times just typing or just writing it down helps you to figure it out because you're getting your thoughts on paper and you don't have to.
I would strongly agree with that.
Constantly go over, like, I joke about this being my existential notebook, but there's stuff in here that has nothing to do with the podcast as
Absolutely.
well.
And I would I have a journal myself. It's not a daily journal, but it's much in the same fashion in which if I have something I want to work out or document, I take down, even if it is stream of thought style. Yeah. And then it's just what I'm thinking, and as opposed to an argument. Some of them are good arguments. Some of them are not. But that's what's important is here, in that you're trying to work it out yourself and figure out how you can address it in those carefully considered steps,
Mhm.
instead of immediately have some soma, go to the psychologist, and just get a solution that
Mhm.
may not even really be the best solution because they don't understand you as well as you do. Well,
Yes.
you should.
I do a very similar thing whenever responding to making an argument to someone, which I don't do a lot, but occasionally if I see something that one I know a lot about, or two am passion. Wait,
Tickles your fancy.
I can't use that word.
Don't use the word. It's banned. I will find a way to bleep it out of our live episode.
What word
Tickles your fancy. We'll go with that.
Yes. Invested in a topic I have a particular investment in. It usually takes me, and frankly, sometimes it's a waste of time, because they'll just be like. Anyway, I'll take like.
That's That's another day. I'm gonna write that one down too.
I'll take like 45 minutes to write this like carefully argued, completely free of emotion, statistics, logical through line, proof, evidence, reasoning. And then, usually, in most cases, they don't even respond to something like that. What are you writing down?
Another episode topic.
Oh, excellent.
Because you're giving me like 7 today.
Good, we gotta keep the podcast going.
We're running out of topics. Our list is running short. Education was kind of like the end-all be-all, and now I don't really know what to do.
That's okay, we're doing okay today.
Yeah, we're doing fine. I think this one's a good one.
So anyway, going back to, unless you have anything more to say on
No,
this.
go ahead.
Like you said, like you wrote down, we can address this in a topic.
Yes, yeah, that's something. The best way of putting it, it almost. I don't know how I feel about the phrasing "lack of emotion" in argument. So that's something I think we'll have to talk about. Is at what point should emotion stop or start in an argument? So, foreshadowing.
Excellent. So back to the issue of psychologists and the field of psychology more generally, and I got this from, I think, a different one of Peterson's videos. He says, this isn't a direct quote, but the problem with traditional psychology is that it focuses too heavily on an individual's psyche as opposed to like their internal mental state as opposed to their behaviors, leading to proposed solutions that seek to correct an internal problem that may have originated externally. Do you need me to
read it again
read
for
that
the
again?
listeners? It took me a moment to get through that one, but please read it again. That's a good quote.
It's not a quote, I think.
Well, I think I remember that from the video.
Paraphrase.
That's what he said, basically.
But one problem with traditional psychology is that it focuses too heavily on an individual's internal mental state as opposed to their behaviors, external, leading to proposed solutions that seek to correct an internal problem that may have originated externally.
So what he's saying here is that more often than not, these psychologists assume that the crisis someone is facing is being caused by an inherent disorder.
Yeah.
In the individual as a psychological disorder, not a physical disorder.
It's either genetic or something along those lines.
Yeah. As opposed to the complexity of their life is causing that crisis.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, it could. We know that certain chemicals cause different emotions.
Of course.
But what if what's causing those chemicals is not something genetic? What if it's something about our lives or the way we're conducting ourselves or something that's happened or a particular crisis?
Yeah. And there's swaths of psychological debate about the value of the psyche as compared to behavior in the discussion. And there's behaviorists and all of the different types of mental ones. Famously, the psychoanalysis ones of Freud, but that debate is still a large part of it. psychology today is trying to be more of that double, where it's both.
Yeah.
But still, I would agree, it feels very much focused on the mental state first. And for example, we talked before many times how if someone has an issue or a crisis and they go to a psychiatrist, they typically will be, of course, given soma, and then more often than not prescribed as depressive or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
When it might just be the case of they have a tangible issue in their lives. Take, for example, someone who lives in a broken home.
Yeah.
And to use an extreme example, I really should drink water, but someone who has an abusive parent.
Sorry about that. Water break.
Water break. I'm getting my mouth dry because of this. This is really good stuff. But, okay. This individual may have an abusive parent, a bad home that they're struggling in, and they're not doing well in school, and they go to the school psychologist. And that psychologist, not knowing directly about some of their private family life, may assume they're just depressive and prescribe them happy pills to get them through school and feel better about their work and all that stuff. And there's a whole debate to be had about that value. But they might miss out on the physical effect of the behavior of the family. When in that situation, I would argue that's significantly more the reason. And I wouldn't say they're depressive at all. I'd say they're being abused.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I would argue in that case, wow, you are really...
I'm not okay.
In that case, maybe just because it's so out of their control, maybe something like an antidepressant would be warranted.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it would still be much more advantageous to have someone try and go in and fix that problem, get them out of that situation.
Yeah, I use an extreme example just to show that point, but definitely in that situation you wouldn't just address it that way.
But here's I guess the more controversial part, as I put up the controversy warning.
The equivocal controversy warning.
So Peterson in one of his videos references another psychologist from, I think it was the 60s, named Thomas Szasz, spelled S-Z-A-S.
I vaguely know that name.
He authored a book called, this will get me in trouble, The Myth of Mental Illness.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I know that book, yeah.
So he proposed that most people who believe they have psychological illnesses actually have problems in how they live their lives. Don't get mad at me yet.
I'm just listening through.
I'm
Hear your whole argument before making a decision on how I'm going to reply. In an impassionate tone. Dispassionate tone, based strictly on argument and the information Luke is about to present me.
Yes.
Okay, go on.
So, this isn't to bash anyone. It's more meant as a possible solution to a problem if it were any other problem, wouldn't have a good solution. Like, the best solution at that point would be constant psychotherapy and antidepressants.
Okay.
Things like that. Drugs.
Soma.
Yes.
We need that on t-shirt, I think. Have some Soma.
So sometimes, in fact, probably most of the time, making positive changes to one's life are more powerful than any drug that is meant for mental health. And this is where that carefully formulated plan comes in order to fix these. It becomes necessary, who are so often afraid of their mental illness, that it comes to control them and in some cases define who they are.
Well, to use a simple example to corroborate that, if I'm feeling down or overwhelmed, my new go-to thing to do is to reach out to my friends and do something stupid, even
Yes.
stupid within the law.
Yes.
And that's where
Most of the time.
that's where our famous usage of crackhead energy comes in.
Yes.
Because you can get, that's clearly, crackhead energy is a non-equal replacement for crack the drug, but it's the same idea that yes, you could literally take or partake in crack. I'm educated, kids. I'm cool. Partake in the consumption of crack. I'm sorry.
Smoke upon the devil's lettuce.
But yes, you could do that if you're feeling sad, or you could enjoy the company of those around you in a way that you can control, and, as most often seen with drugs, not become dependent upon.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue, even if you become dependent on your friends, sketchy water here now. Maybe not. Okay. This is where it splits again. This is where it splits again for clarification. Depending on your friends for help, emotionally and stress-wise, can be a really great outlet. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. The only downside to this is you might run into the issue of clingy friends.
Yes.
Which, compared to becoming a crackhead, like an actual crackhead, not crackhead energy, but a genuine crackhead, I think is a much better alternative.
Yeah.
But that's a whole separate discussion to have about reliance on relationships. But what I'm trying to say here is that you don't necessarily need soma.
Yes.
To fix many of the problems you will face, and I think that's what you were getting at too.
Yes.
When
you
can
perfectly
have
outlined my first thing I was about to say. No joke. That was the very first thing. Plan to invest more time in relationships.
That is, we are doing well today, man. Been around you too much.
And obviously these can be any type of relationships, but particularly the relationships with friends.
That was not creepy at all.
I hope they didn't hear that.
But yeah, it's about that the teamwork, I suppose, of it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be relationships. I use relationships as a clear example that I feel many people would be able to relate to.
Oh,
but
it certainly doesn't have to be relationships. I have a whole list.
Yeah,
of things it could
right.
be.
It could be. You want you to read your list?
Yes, I want to read
Go
my
ahead and
list,
read your list
that I prepared before the podcast.
All right, kiddo, read your list.
Another way of going about it is to invest more into gaining knowledge and insight / experience into something that is important to you. And what?
I was gonna say that. What is going on?
Something.
We need to have a discussion. I think we already know what we're thinking.
We just need to have one of us talk and the other person
just agree.
Along a similar vein, you can invest more into your professional aspirations. Obviously, like you were talking, we've talked many times about the value of jobs, the drawbacks potentially, especially in high school, things like that. But the importance of security, going back to the pyramid of needs, even financial security in this case.
Security here meaning feeling safe.
Yes.
in where you live, not necessarily mean having a good lock on your door.
Yeah.
Just for clarification.
Yeah. But that feeling of being secure in your life is important to mental health.
Yes, yeah.
I always use mental health in quotes just because I don't like
the meaning of mental health.
Yeah.
Have we really defined that?
No. it's certainly thrown around a lot.
Do we want to? Do we want to do that today?
I don't know. If you... I can keep going, and if you want to...
No, keep going. This is great.
Okay.
This is great.
So the next one would be to analyze your dietary and exercising habits.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously keeping yourself physically healthy goes essentially parallel with how your mind is doing, and there's
absolutely physical state is something that is absolutely parallel to mental state. They affect each other. But it's much easier to address the physical state, which is why it's good that you mentioned that as a method you can help yourself.
Certainly. So before I go into what I would say is the most important of the things you can do to help yourself, I would like to thank our sponsor.
Who is it today?
Literally nothing.
Yes.
The subscribers.
Reoccurring as well.
We don't like our subscribers. We like our sponsor. Literally no one. They provide us with absolutely no benefit and no help at all. Not even an actual, any physical payment or even social acceptance.
Some would say literally nothing doesn't exist.
Scoffs intently. Literally no one is the best sponsor I've ever not met. Oh.
Hold on, just before I do anything
have
else,
something?
I've always wanted to do this as soon as I figured it out on OBS.
What have you done?
Lol. And now it just shows up on the screen. I was about to make a point, but I forgot it at the last second, so I threw in literally nothing. I threw in the
You
sponsor.
didn't throw that in. That's part of today. They sponsor us, well, not at all, but greatly, and they are a fundamental reason that we are here today. So we thank our sponsor, literally no one, and we encourage all of our listeners to patronize them greatly.
Click the link in the description.
But also not at all.
Anyways, your good point. Now that we've derailed the
Yes,
entire conversation.
I remember it now. Now that we've spent 2 minutes going off the rails.
That needs to be a t-shirt, I think, too.
We just need all these on a t-shirt.
Just the entire script of the first episode on a t-shirt.
So, notice what wasn't on this list. Pampering yourself. Eating lots of comfort foods.
We're on the same wavelength.
Well, if we're on the same wavelengths, please.
No. Please continue the list.
Oh.
I'm not very good at ruling out what wasn't there. That's the one thing I can't do.
Oh, what wasn't there? Oh, but you've addressed this so perfectly. We did an episode on this. Would you like to take a guess?
You cover the paper. I don't think I know which one it is.
Well, I guess we didn't do really an episode on this.
Oh, thanks. You were lying to me.
It was part of one.
How dare you lying to me?
It was a significant.
You are a monster. I will. This is the last episode, folks. Thank you for hearing. I'm sorry. We can never do this again. We've come to an impasse. Okay, tell me. I really want to know what it is now.
Okay. I am pretty good at building suspense sometimes, just in my idiocy and not ever getting to the point. He's about to kill me right now.
You're still building oh my god.
Okay, so the most important thing I would argue on this list, with the exception possibly of forming and discovering a purpose in one's life, which
hello, that's getting real deep there.
Which isn't something you can just do, and arguably takes more than just a formulated plan.
Mm-hmm.
It takes like a lifetime deliberation.
Yeah,
and,
that's a whole.
and kind of doing all
Oh,
of
I
the-
see self-meaning. I see now how that's kind of related.
kind of doing all of these other things.
Okay, maybe you didn't lie entirely to me. Only a little.
So the most important thing besides that is having a routine in one's life.
Oh!
Oh, because it's obvious, or
Yes.
okay.
Andrew's sad now that he couldn't guess that.
Because I mean,
We've talked about that a lot.
yeah.
But yeah, I would agree. Having a routine is a great way of just regimenting yourself into what you want to be. So in the game of life, there is no such thing as adding more of what you want.
Yeah.
Everything is a trade-off. So if you want less of the internet and more of the reading, you have to trade those two.
Well,
You do.
You can be more efficient with things.
Yes, you can be more efficient, and that's where using a schedule of sorts comes in, because then you can maximize the things you want to do the most, even when you have limited hours in a day. There's the great meme of people being like, I don't have time for band in my schedule. Looks at sleep. Maybe I do. And that's the case. It is a trade-off, and you really have to decide how you want to approach that. And in a world of increasing complexity, when you're at your job, you're asked to write a new thesis for this project. You need to make a slideshow for a separate one, and also you need to have a team meeting. That's a lot on your plate, quite suddenly. So what do? You figure out how to work that into your life, and instead of wallowing in the panic, in the crisis of it,
you create a plan, a
and
routine.
Mm-hmm. And in that case, if one is to go into panic and assume, or go just have a crisis in general, they might assume they can't handle anxiety, which, there you go, there's the assumed mental illness. When I would argue it's not. It's just the fact that they're overwhelmed, and most decent humans should be able to get over those things.
Yes.
Of course, when genuine mental illness comes into play, a chemical issue, that is something to regard as maybe they do struggle with that and can't get out of that. But I would say, for the purpose of this discussion,
but again,
we address
and that gets
so-called
back
make-believe.
into the debate of where does the chemical imbalance originate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes there are genetic presuppositions to this kind of thing.
Predisposition.
Yeah. So,
I
sorry.
caught you. That's 1 me, 75 Luke.
I believe in the Jordan Peterson video, he said what happens with mental illness is that the complexity builds up, and then those genetic presuppositions are like the weakest part of you genetically. And he compared it to a balloon, where if you keep putting air in it, it will burst at the weakest point, which can be a genetic predisposition, or whatever word, predisposition to one of these mental illnesses.
So, what would be an example of a genetic predisposition?
I don't know.
So, okay.
I would assume that if he would say something like that, then there would be evidence to back up that there are genetic
Yeah, my question here is more one of clarification, in that when he used the example bursting at the weakest point like a balloon, I think of lashing out in a way that isn't common for you, but is the weakest point of your character. So let's see. Say you're not on great terms with your family at the moment, and you have a significantly added amount of stress and complexity to your life, leading to a crisis. At that point, is that genetic predisposition of disliking your family to outcry against them and lash out instead of facing your own issues? Maybe. I'll have to do some more reading on that to see what he really meant there. But that's a great way of putting it, in that, like a balloon or a chain link fence, you'll break at the weakest point. That's absolutely true. Because if you're not a strong individual mentally, you do face that challenge.
So back to the idea of a routine, and Peterson stresses this in one of his videos. Like, if someone came to me with some kind of problem, one of the first questions I would ask them would be about their sleeping habits, because it's been proven that your circadian rhythm kind of regulates your mood in a way.
Is that rhythm the pattern through which you go through the systems of sleep?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the? It
I know REM is one, but I don't know all of them. It's been a long time since I read them.
Hold on, this is frustrating.
Look it up.
I need to go.
When in doubt, look it up. Oh, that poor computer.
My poor computer just.
You really typed it in, and then 2 seconds later it showed up.
Circadian rhythm is a natural internal process that regulates the sleep-wake cycle. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's what I thought it was. So yeah, that system regulates your mood, and if you're getting up at different times every day, or going to sleep at different times every day, or getting varied amounts of sleep. And
yeah,
things like
if the crisis within your life is challenging,
challenge.
messing with the patterns that you normally go by, that'll really disturb the way you think, and everyone knows less sleep is an issue and will drive you insane, particularly when they're offset by several hours, and offset in different lengths too. But this is where we draw back to the discussion between how much of a mental illness is caused by the behavior and the situation, and how much is caused by the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason I find it interesting, you immediately start by asking the sleep, and yet now I see why. Because if someone's behavior is disrupted from what they normally are, and humans being very repetitive human or creatures,
Yeah.
wanting to have that clear repetition and changing to that cycle can dramatically affect it, particularly with something like sleep. That makes a lot of sense, and that would be the principal effector that results in a mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, oh, they're just flat out depressive, which makes them not work. Which, saying that sentence feels ignorant almost. It feels very uncomfortable because it doesn't work, at least from a logical standpoint.
It's interesting. What I found in looking a little more into this, and it doesn't as much matter when you go to sleep or how long you sleep. I mean, that does matter, because obviously sleep is important for
I don't sleep ever.
getting the right amount of sleep is important for other processes in the body.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important thing as it pertains to this is when you wake up. And to the point where even if it's better to only sleep 5 or 6 hours one night and wake up at the same time every day, than to sleep 8 hours every day but have that wake up time be varied, because it messes with your circadian rhythm.
Yeah, because you ask a student who doesn't do any extracurricular activities and does their work on time what their sleep schedule looks like, theirs might be 9 to 6 every day, and they're fine.
That's a little long.
Well, I'm assuming that they do nothing.
Yeah.
As a control example. But then you compare that to, say, a band student who has evening rehearsals and band competitions on the weekend. You ask them how much sleep they usually get. Theirs might be 10 to 6. Or even midnight to 6, which is clearly significantly less. Yet, those two individuals will often function on the same level.
Yeah.
Because they're getting a clean cycle. What affects it is when that beginning particularly changes, because you're not used to that and it's messing with
It's
the
when
natural state. Then.
it's when you go like 10 to 6 Monday or Sunday through Friday nights, and then on the weekend you stay up until 2 and then sleep until noon.
Mhm.
That really gets things off, and I'd say, and I don't have anything to back this up other than what we stated so far, but I'd say sleeping in is one of the worst things to happen to mental health ever.
Yeah, because the definition of sleeping in is one fundamentally of, I would argue, sloth.
Yeah.
And I will not deny I sleep in.
Yes.
I do, because it feels good. But I should be very clear, there is no such thing as making up sleep.
No.
In fact, making up sleep, quote unquote, often just messes with that cycle more
Yeah.
and makes it worse in a kind of horrible misunderstanding.
Yes. I don't know. I had something. So, okay, yeah.
We're like going all over the place, but this is good.
I know, it's pretty good.
Our episode, the less structured they are, the better.
Except last week. Or
That one wasn't really even. Oh,
no.
No,
The
that one.
special episode.
that one.
The purple.
the purpling. Purplening.
So if you take nothing else away from this, wake up at the same time. And not only that, get out of bed at the same time. I would personally recommend never letting yourself stay in bed past 8 a.m. We've all done it.
Oh yeah.
We're all hypocrites.
We're all hypocrites. But that's the idea.
But I'm going to try and start living by that.
It's a good principle to have.
And probably on the other end of that, probably don't get out of bed before 6. Or, of course, sometimes people don't have a choice with school and stuff.
Yeah, right.
But
Have a schedule
you-
that's consistent enough.
if you
that
have
it's
to
comfortable.
if you have to get out of bed at 5:30, then don't let yourself go past 7:30 on the weekends.
Right.
Things
Kinda-
like that.
Yeah, that's something that takes a bit of experimentation to see what feels right for you.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it takes at least 3 days to set a good cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly you would need really at least a week or two
Yeah.
to know how that week feels.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of bring this all together now, all of it. When
We didn't talk about the things in the schedule besides sleep. Of course, we've done things like that before.
do you have a piece there?
No, I don't have anything, but there's more. There's obviously more to a routine than just sleeping.
Okay, we can go there if you want to. So I don't have anything for that though. We've discussed that before.
Yeah, we have. I just didn't know, because you can never be too thorough on something like this.
Well, what I'll say to that is, in a schedule, it's incredibly important to have your goals understood,
Mm-hmm.
because if your goal is to become a better reader and you don't allocate more time to reading, well, how are you expecting to get better?
Yeah.
In fact, by doing so, you'll probably make yourself feel worse.
That felt like a personal attack.
I'm sorry. That is exactly what happened with me, and I was supposed to have a school book done a week ago. I'm not finished with it. In my defense, it is a difficult book, and it's a little longer than anticipated. But it really is the case of I'll get to it when I get to it. When, for example, last year I read our entire U.S. history textbook. We were supposed to do so don't worry. But I made a point of read the whole thing, and I have a great screenshot at 3 a.m. finishing the book. But the only
3 a.m. That doesn't seem very good for your sleep
Stop.
schedule.
Stop. It was an exception. It was a good day. Also, I had to turn it in the next morning, so I had to finish it.
Oh.
But the reason that worked for so long throughout the year was because I had a schedule of how many pages I needed to read every day. So I would literally every night, as part of my schedule before going to bed, read X number of pages. And if I read under, I had to get caught up the next day, or the rest of the week. And it was something that held myself accountable. And the reason why I didn't have it finished until 3 a.m. that night was because after we stopped having to read the chapters for class, and it was just the final like present day chapters that we don't go through.
Yeah.
Once we got to those, there was no more schedule, so it ceased, and I almost didn't finish it. So that last night I read some 60 pages of a textbook.
Wow. So 3 a.m. Hence 3
I
a.m.
have a really great photo of like 3:40 a.m. I'm like finished, 1,000 pages done. And that was a good feeling because it demonstrated that I could complete something that I structured myself to do. And it was something I knew I wanted to do for a number of reasons. But furthermore, I knew I could do because of that structuring. And this isn't meant to say that you need to structure every minute, second of your day. But it can be very helpful to consider what your day looks like and how much time you're spending on each thing. Even a general pie chart of how you spend your day can be immensely revealing.
Yeah.
You ready for me to wrap up?
Yes.
So, to bring this all together now, in complexity, crisis, and mental illness, to our viewers, know that the world will get more complex. If you're younger, absolutely. If you're older, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if you're about to retire,
It's one of the great myths of life, or one of the great lies people tell themselves is when I have time. I'll do this when I have time. And I think the last few months have proven that people don't do what they're going to say when they have time.
Yeah, a global quarantine forcing us to have more time is the principal example of us not getting done.
Yep.
What we should have gotten done. So, know that things will increase in complexity, and things won't necessarily make sense as you age and learn more. But what matters is that you're always learning, and you're always applying what you learn. So that when you have a time of incredible stress, and you face a crisis, which will no doubt happen, you can understand how to handle that. Be it pushing yourself more into your work or your reading or your friendships and working out a way to grow and feel safe that way. You can address those crises much more effectively than if you assume it's an issue in your psyche and merely go to a doctor and get some soma.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point I would honestly say you're wasting your own time. Because instead of becoming a better person, which is the point of this podcast.
Introspection.
Instead of becoming a better person, all you're going to do is develop dependence on one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if that one thing goes away, new crisis. So there is something to be said about becoming dependent on the things that make you, the natural things that solve that, such as relationships and reading and such.
You can become dependent on a routine.
Mm-hmm. But I would say, to some degree, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
To become, if your natural instinct when stressed out is to go sit in your room and read, I don't see how that's an issue.
Yeah.
In fact, in a situation where it's, for example, like you're having an argument with your family and you're getting very fired, of course, leaving the situation is a great step. But leaving the situation, distracting yourself and clearing your head is the principal way to become better.
That was a very well delivered monologue.
Thank you.
To close out this episode. And I believe it actually stayed caught up the whole time.
Hey, look at that. It worked.
I'm going to leave it play for a few minutes, muted of course, just to make sure, but I think this time we should be clear on the
Excellent.
having parts of it cut off. So now I can finally deliver our outro, and it will be heard by the world.
Yes, the outro.
I'm Luke,
I'm Andrew.
and thank you for watching the Two Existential Dudes podcast.